Disgraceland, a poem by Mary Karr. Before my first communion, I clung to doubt as Satan spider-like stalked the orb of dark surrounding Eden for a wormhole into paradise. God had formed me from gel in my mother's womb, smaller than a bite of burger. Quietly, I grew till my lungs were done. Then the Lord sailed a soul like a lit arrow to inhabit me. Maybe that piercing made me howl at birth, or the masked creatures whose scalpel cut a lightning bolt to free me. I was hoisted by the heels and swatted, fed and hauled around. Time-lapse photos show my fingers grow past crayon outlines. My feet come to fill spike heels. Eventually, I lurched out to kiss the wrong mouths, get stewed, and sulk around. Christ always stood to one side with a glass of water. I swatted the sap away. When my thirst got great enough to ask, a clear stream welled up inside. Some jade wave buoyed me forward, and I found myself upright in the instant, with a garden inside my own ribs aflourish. There, the arbor leaves, the vines push out plump grapes. You are loved, someone said. Take that and eat it. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all. His compassion is over all his creation. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and your faithful ones shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to all people your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord upholds all who are falling, and raises up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand. You satisfy the desire of every living thing. All the Lord's ways are just. All the Lord's doings are kind. The Lord is near to all who call, to all who call upon the Lord in truth. The Lord fulfills the desire of all the faithful, and hears their cry and saves them. All who love the Lord preserves. All the wicked the Lord destroys. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord. Let all flesh bless God's holy name forever and ever.
Our main question for today is, where do we begin when sharing our faith with other people? For the last 50 years or so, the church has been really obsessed with starting with the sin of humanity and Christ on the cross. And I'm not saying that those aren't valuable pieces of the puzzle, but they might not be the right starting point for you when sharing your faith. And the thing is that salvation didn't just come into the world's imagination when Christ was born. No, salvation has been a thing that God has been doing since the beginning of time, since creation. In fact, everything God does is a saving act. At the beginning, God created. And then, after some time, God liberated the people of Israel. Then, after some time, God came to human beings in the flesh. God incarnated the world. Then, after some time, God died on a cross. Then, after some time, God rose from the dead. Then, after some time, we trust that God will restore the world in completeness. These are all saving acts of God. All of them have saved us, are saving us, will save us. God creates, God liberates, God incarnates and fleshes, God dies, God resurrects, God restores and redeems. These are the things God does, and they save us over and over again. And there are lots of other things that God does. Our psalm for this morning shares that God lifts up the lowly and feeds the hungry and satisfies the desires of all who are faithful to God. God is near to us, protects us, and preserves our life. These too are saving acts of God. Our starting point as Christians, I think, must always be God's goodness. So where is it? Is it in God's creating or liberating or incarnating or dying or resurrecting or restoring, where you experience God's salvation right now? I think that's the place you start. So my starting point is incarnation, at least for now. Incarnation is meaningful to me, and it feels and is a good action of God because God chose to experience the same risk and the same vulnerability that I do, that I experience. We've talked in the last 4 years as a society about what the risk is to be a woman in the world. We risk violence just by being women. We could be the recipients of violence at any time as a woman. And as human beings, all human beings, we are vulnerable to disease that doesn't make sense. We are vulnerable to pandemics. We are vulnerable to oppression. We are vulnerable to evil. We are vulnerable to death. And God chose to take on that vulnerability, chose to risk it all, chose to risk life itself, to share that experience with me, with you, and restore it. So for now, incarnation is my starting point. God choosing to come to the world wrapped in flesh is my starting point, because that is where I experience God's goodness. So where is it that you experience God's goodness? What is the act of God that saves you?
Hi everybody, my name is Reverend Rachel Byers and I'm an ordained deacon here in the Pacific Northwest Conference of the United Methodist Church. Today we're going to work on drawing our spiritual journey timelines. They're pretty simple. All you have to do is know what happened in your life, and you don't even have to remember all the small stuff. What we're going to talk about are the big moments when you felt really close to God, or the big moments when maybe you felt a little bit far away from God. And the purpose of this is to give us a different way to talk about our faith and to tell our story of faith. So if you're ready to dive in, this is what you're going to need. You'll need a blank piece of paper, a marker, pen, pencil, or crayon, and a space to draw on. That's it. Pretty simple, right? To get started, you're going to take your blank piece of paper and you're going to draw the map of your life. The beginning is when you're born, and the end is where you are now. All right, everybody got it? Great. The next thing we're going to do is add in some big places in your life. So when you see on my spiritual journeys timeline, I have places like camp, school, the Pacific Northwest. There's a mission trip that I took when I was in college that was really important to me. All these moments are going to be on my timeline. You'll see that I have some clip art versions. You don't have to have the clip art. You can draw a scribble or even write the name of the place. That's okay too. Take a couple of minutes to get that done. All set? Don't worry, you can come back to this later if you're not quite finished yet. The next piece that we're going to do is add in some of the important relationships we've had in our lives, and the relationships and moments where we felt really close to God in those relationships. You'll see on mine I've added another baby. That's when my sister was born. I was about 2 years old. You'll also see that I've added my grandparents. This is about the time we took a camping trip out west. We spent a whole lot of time together, saw some really amazing things, and I've never been so much more in awe of God and creation than I was on that camping trip. You'll also see toward the end that I came out as an LGBT person kind of recently in my life. This is a very important part of my relationship with God, with the church, and with each other. So all of these moments have made it onto my timeline. What moments make it onto your timeline as relationships that are important to you? All right, time for the next piece. And like before, don't worry if you didn't get to add all of those important people in your life just yet. Next, we're going to talk about the hard stuff. Maybe there are some relationships that were really stormy for you. They're really challenging or toxic. Maybe there was a moment for you when you felt really far away from God. I have some storms on my timeline. I struggle pretty deeply with depression. You'll see I have a tornado in the middle of my road right around high school. This is a time when I was pretty deep into depression and I didn't know if I would make it out. It felt like everything was spinning around and I was just going crazy. I didn't know where God was, didn't know what my relationship looked like with God. And so that was a pretty important time for me. And it's one that's important for me to put on my timeline and to talk about when I talk about my faith. So now it's time for you to add in your storms. Maybe they're all mixed together. Maybe some of those important relationships to you were a little bit stormy also. Find those moments and add those storms in. All right. And now we should have arrived kind of at the end of your timeline. You'll see that I have a picture of me, my wife, and my dog last November. This is an important moment for me. This is my family and what we look like now. Where have you ended up? What does your life look like? And once we get that final picture done, we're going to talk about it. So add in any other things you want and then find someone to share your faith story with. Call your pastors too. Tell them a little bit about what happened. Some things that it's important to know is that not everything is going to show up on your faith stories timeline. Every time you do it, stuff's going to be different. There's some things that I put on my timeline before that I didn't put on my timeline this time. There's some things I added to my timeline this time that I've never had before. Because as we grow and as we change and as we move through the world as people, we see God very differently in very different ways. Let this be a way to help you reflect on your life, see where the hard times have been, see where God has been, and speak to the goodness that is in you.
As students prepare to go back to school in the fall in one way or another, we can support them by collecting some school supplies. Whether they're going to be doing school at home or at the school building, it's important to support them with what they need so they can be successful in school this year. In addition to regular school supplies, they're also in need of thermometers. Every morning, every kid before they go to school is going to need to have their temperature taken. So on your next weekly grocery shopping trip, consider picking up some school supplies and a thermometer for a family in town to use. The distribution day will be August 10th, so please get it in as soon as possible. There's a tub on our back porch at the church that you can put those school supplies in at any time, and I will check that tub regularly. Thank you for doing that. As you might have heard, one of our longtime members, George Bauman, is moving to Southern California by the end of this month. And though we are sad to see him go, it is important as a faith community to send him off with our blessing. So if you could, please write a card for George and send it to the church at the address below so we can get it to him by the end of the month. If you can send in that card in the next week or so, we can make sure to get it to him before he goes. Go, share your faith with others, knowing that God saves and saves and saves and saves.